So good day to everybody. My name is Peter Coaldrake, and I am the interim lead of Module 1, which is Product Design and Management. To give you a little background on myself, I recently retired from Corteva AgriScience after a 34-year career in the plant breeding organization of Pioneer and then Corteva. I started my career breeding sorghum and managing the research center in Australia. And then I moved to the US, opened a corn research center in Champaign, Illinois, and then moved to Des Moines in multiple research leadership positions. At the end of my career, I spent a lot of my time developing and implementing a portfolio management system for Corteva's research investment. And so I bring that background to EIB and to Module 1 as we look at product design and management. So the mission of Module 1 is to enable a sustainable transformation of how products are designed, created, managed within the public sector breeding networks. The vision that is in place for Module 1 is to improve the public sector breeding programs by working transparently, methodically, and professionally to increase the rates of variety turnover due to improved product acceptability and performance. And so there's several questions and comments in the chat box in the previous sessions that it's not just rate of genetic gain that's going to be required in products that are going to be successful. It's also that those products need to have the complete set of traits as well as product performance that will make them acceptable to both producers and consumers of the products that get released. So as we think about the objectives that are put in place for Module 1, it's consistent and clear communication based on common terminology. So it's clear that we have a consistent and concise set of terms that we use consistently so that we don't cause confusion when folks hear multiple terms that are targeted at the same thing. We need to have customer-driven identification of market segments and product profiles based on robust and consistent processes. We need these processes to be adaptable across all crops that are in the CG system. And so that when we look from one center to another or from one crop to another, there was a consistent approach that was used to define a market segment and identify a product profile. We need to work to make sure that investment is aligned with the impact of that investment can make through the development and communication of solid pipeline investment cases. We need to look at how we measure breeding program impact and accountability through the adoption of stage gate systems and annual product advancement meetings. So we need to bring rigor and discipline into the process. And finally, we need to have breeding program goals based on realistic performance and impact metrics. If we go back and look at this slide and the words that I've got highlighted in the gold font, it's common terminology for market segments, for product profiles, for pipeline investment cases. It's a stage gate system, it's annual product advancement meetings, and it's performance and impact metrics. We need to get all of these established for all crops across all of CG. If we go to the next slide, which is the same words, but we look at the bolded letters or bolded words on here, it's consistent, it's robust and consistent, solid, impact, accountability, realistic, and impact. So you can see the common theme here. We need to get consistent, robust processes developed and implemented across all of the CG centers and all the CG crops. So where does product design and management, the module, fit in the whole scheme of things? It's in the blue highlighted section of this diagram, which you'll see numerous times through multiple presentations over the next couple of days. But as I think about it, the role of module 1 is to set targets, it's to define processes, and it's to set metrics that will provide the opportunity to understand what progress is being made. So again, set targets using consistent, well-defined processes, and then put in place metrics to allow the measurement of improvement and success. So essentially, it's the design of what needs to be done. What needs to be done will continue to evolve over time and with consumers' needs for different types of products. So the output from module 1 needs to continually be refined and evolved to make sure that the products that are developed through the remaining part of this process will truly meet, and if not exceed, the expectations of growers and of consumers of those products. So how do I think about this, and how am I starting to communicate the need for a consistent process around the definition of market segments and product profiles? To me, as I think about a future product, I think about biological components of that product. So disease traits, agronomic traits, maturity, production system traits. I think about value chain components of the products that are needed. How's the product going to be used? What are the consumer expectations of that product for aroma, for taste, for processability, for storability? With an understanding of the region and what traits are driven by the region, with an understanding of the consumer of the product and the traits that consumer desires in a product, those things together allow the definition of a market segment, which would be done on a regional basis and would be a unique combination of customer, where customer is both the grower and the consumer of the product, what they prefer and what would be in the ideal product. Once we define that market segment, we can go on and then define the ideal product for that market segment. And the description of the ideal product would be the product profile. So you've heard talk in the earlier sessions today of market segments and product profiles. This is how I see them fitting together and how I see us defining them as we move forward. So in thinking about how to define a market segment, I think about it firstly as the crop, then the region that we're focusing on, then the biological region or the ecosystem. Then is it a clone? Is it a variety? Is it a hybrid? Next step in the process is how is it going to be used? Is it going to be consumed on farm or sold at fresh markets? Is it going to be a commodity sold into commodity channels? Or is it going to be sold into an end-use value chain? Then I think about the production system. So for rice, for example, is it direct seeded or is it transplanted? Another example could be for sorghum. Is it for grain or is it a dual purpose sorghum product that is going to be for both forage and for grain? I think about the input level. So is it low nitrogen, high nitrogen, other inputs? I think about the maturity that's required. I think about the color that may be required in the grain or the flesh. I think about the grain and flesh type. So again, if it's rice, is it long, slender grain or is it soft grain? And finally, I think about biofortification, and is it needing to be biofortified or not biofortified? So these are the generic components that I've thought about, that if we work consistently and logically through this, we should come up with a market segment. As you can see, the top part of this, where I've highlighted in green, is really the components that the grower of the crop is going to be concerned with. And then at the bottom in yellow on either side, it's more the components that impact the consumer or the quality of the product. So by going through these components step by step, we should logically come up with a defined market segment that covers, that basically cuts out and identifies a unique product need for the products that we're creating. and that product that will be defined by both needs of the grower and needs of the consumer. Those two together define a unique market segment. You've heard some discussion about the pipeline investment case, and I'd just like to explain how I view the pipeline investment case, what it is, what the units are that we're using to conduct this work, and how we might look at different views to actually develop the pipeline investment case. So at the highest level, it's the opportunity and it's the investment that's being made against obtaining or achieving that opportunity. When we think about the unit to define opportunity, it's market segment by market segment. So we have a unique market segment. Each of those market segments is a unique opportunity to create a product. We think about the investment that's needed. We need to think about the investment in the pipeline that will be required to create products that have the rate of genetic gain and have the other traits that the grower and the consumer are expecting in that product. So that's how much money are we spending in the research pipeline against creating product for a unique market segment. We think about how we might view the market segment. We could think of it in terms of the number of hectares that are in that segment, the dollar value that is generated by product in that segment, the population in that market segment, the number of households that are in that, the number of families or individuals living at or below the poverty level in that market segment, the opportunity to improve the nutrition of crops that are grown in that market segment, the impact on sustainability, the impact on climate change. These are just some of the potential views that could be looked at as far as the impact of making investment in a market segment. We think about the views of the investment. It's dollars spent is one way. It's also number of products that are commercialized is another way that we could look at the outcome of investment against a particular market segment. So I hope this gives you a feel for when you hear pipeline investment case, what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to identify opportunity and then align investment against that opportunity. We're trying to measure the impact of that investment against the opportunity in a given market segment. So what does Module 1 offer partners? In the simplest terms, it's support and guidance for market segment identification, support and guidance for market segment description. So once we've identified the market segment, going through the components listed on the earlier slide, how do we describe that market segment? And so is it number of people? Is it number of people below the poverty line? Is it number of hectares? Is it, what are unique characteristics that we need to understand so that we can determine the impact that we can have in a particular market segment? Once we have the market segment identified, we can develop the product profile. Once we have the market segment identified, we can align current breeding pipelines to those market segments and understand the size of the effort that's being focused on a given market segment. We can create the investment case. Once we understand what it is we're trying to do and what the targets are from the product profile, what the trait levels are, minimum trait requirements, we can put a staging gateway process in place so that we ensure that products that are advanced from one generation to the next meet or exceed the expectations that are outlined in the product profile. We can also bring some structure and discipline to product advancement meetings. So what are the expectations for a product to advance from one stage to the next? Not just in product performance, but in seed availability and producibility and a number of other areas. What criteria need to be met in order for a product to advance from one stage to the next? These are all things that Module 1 is working on, that we will offer in the future to all the partners to improve the process, to bring alignment around targets, to bring alignment around processes, to bring alignment around the metrics that we're going to use to measure success. So how does Module 1 interlink with other EIB modules? So for the definitions and processes, we interact with all EIB modules and with EIB leadership. So it's essential that EIB is using a common language when we talk to each of you about what and how each of us in EIB are going to do to support and ensure your success. We need to work on the market segments and pipeline investment, and in the pipeline investment cases with EIB leadership, so they in turn can take those pipeline investment cases to the Crops to End Hunger initiative, knowing that there was a consistent approach taken for the development of each and every pipeline investment case. By defining market segments and product profiles, we provide the direction for Module 2 to help them align the breeding pipelines and optimize the breeding pipelines for a given market segment. By identifying the key traits that are needed in the product profile, we're providing direction to Modules 2, 3, and 4 of what those traits are, the scale that those traits are going to be measured on, and the minimum threshold which needs to be achieved for a product to be successful in a given market segment. So we're defining the targets, we're defining the key traits, we're defining what the measurement scale is. So Eduardo and Gustavo can take that information and use it as they seek to optimize the breeding process, as they seek to optimize phenotyping technology. We need to make sure that the traits that are being measured are the key traits that are in the relevant product profile. And by putting in place a stage and gateway system and conducting annual structured advancement meetings, we start to bring the discipline and structure to the product development process, which is essential for Modules 2 and for Module 5 as they think about this, the systems that are needed to support data management, to support robust decision making, and to record what unique genetic elements have advanced from one stage to the next. So a lot of interaction with other EIB modules, but again, it comes back to the right targets, the right processes, and the right metrics. And those need to be continually changed and updated as the needs of the grower and the consumer change. But once we get a solid base, it's not a huge overhaul, it's just minor tweaks in all of those things so that we ensure the products that are produced and released are going to be adopted and grown by growers and accepted by consumers. So as I reflect on the challenges for 2020 for Module 1, first one is the size of the team. When I started working with Module 1, George Koch was still involved, Tawanda was still involved. Now, neither of those guys are with EIB. And so it's me as in my consulting role that's trying to do the best that I can to ensure that we keep moving forward. Another challenge that I see is just traditions and culture of the CG system and folks within it. And we talked significantly about that in Jan's session. And as we want to implement change, understanding traditions, understanding culture, and making sure we take those into account as we try to implement change will be key and has been key. Another challenge that I saw was the process to define market segments and identify product profiles. A lot of work had been done on product profiles, but in a lot of cases, that work was independent of having done the work to define the market segment that drove the product profile. And so I've stepped back and tried to put in place the process to define the market segment. And by default, that process will identify the ideal product profile that will meet and exceed expectations as far as a product for a unique market segment. The fourth key area that I've identified as a challenge is the availability of value and impact data by market segment for the pipeline investment cases. So because the market segments don't follow geopolitical boundaries, collecting data on number of hectares, collecting data on number of people living in that market segment, collecting data on number of people that are living in poverty in a given market segment are all quite challenging, and that data is not readily available. So as we think about the pipeline investment cases, it's absolutely critical that we are aligned on the data that we want to have to understand the value and impact of an investment in a given market segment. Then we have to put the effort in place to actually go and collect that data in a consistent way. So as we look at value or impact of pipeline investment case to pipeline investment case to pipeline investment case, we're confident that we have a robust set of data on which to start to base decisions as to whether we should increase, hold constant, or perhaps decrease the funding that's currently targeted at a given market segment and on developing products that meet the product profile that's been developed for that market segment. So what should you guys expect for 2021 from Module 1? Ideally, there'll be increased support. There'll be folks added to the team. That's Module 1, so that we can make more progress. There will be standardization. We're moving towards and rapidly aligning on a consistent language. We're aligning on a logical approach. We're reaching out and making sure that we're touching base with folks that have been working on understanding gender sensitivity, making sure that that's included in how we define the market segment, how we define the customer base that's in that market segment, and making sure that those gender relevant traits are also included in the product profile that's developed for the products that will be created for a given market segment. So again, back to a consistent language, a logical approach, and I would like to simplify the requests that are made to each and every one of you. And when we do make those requests, that the language is consistent, that it's clear what we're asking for, it's clear how we're going to use it. And so you can see that there's great advantage for full cooperation as we move forward in the defining of market segments, the creation of product profiles, the development of pipeline investment cases. I'd also like to think that we can get better linkage with the EIB modules, with the expanding EIB team, with the CG community, and with others working in the same area. And so we need to avoid having multiple approaches to solving essentially the same issue or same challenge. And so as we look at the creation of market segments and product profiles, ideally this should be consistent across different groups, or at least the components used in those need to be consistent. How they may be presented is up to how the individual group wants to use that information. But I would like to avoid duplicate efforts at collecting similar but not quite the same data to essentially do the same thing. So we're working to get alignment across a number of folks that are involved in this area, bring a consistent approach, be open to integrating changes and improvements, and so that as we move forward, everyone's aligned and the needs of all different groups will be met through the outcome of the one process that's coordinated and driven by EIB. So I'd just like to end and ask you all to relax and think about the future. And I grew up in Australia. I grew up on the east coast of Australia. I took the ocean for granted. I took the ability to go to the ocean whenever I wanted for granted. So I grew up around a number of folks, friends, family that were surfers. And what I'd like to do is just challenge you to think about a surfing parallel as to what we're trying to do with 1CG, what we're trying to drive through EiB. And the challenge is to think about the future and try to visualize the perfect wave. So what does the future look like for us? What would be the ideal state for us to be in 2025 or 2030? And if we think about that and we start to make the moves to get us to that place, I think we'll be very, very successful at what we do. So a couple of things as you think about surfing, and no dare, no flare. So as you look at the picture here, I mean, this guy is windsurfing, but he also has a foil on the bottom of his surfboard. And so this is a radical departure from the regular surfboard where you stood on the board was on top of the wave. No, here you've attached a kite so you can get increased speed. You've attached a foil so the board can come up out of the water and essentially reduce the friction. And so combined with the foil and the kite, you can now get much more speed. You can get right out of the water. You can do a lot of things that you couldn't do before. This is all because someone got creative. Someone challenged status quo and said, we can change this, we can improve it. Another key thing that surfers think about is they expect to wipe out. They expect to make a mistake. If you're not pushing yourself hard, if you're not trying something new, if you're not trying to ride a bigger wave, then you're not learning. You're not achieving what you could possibly achieve. So I think as we all look at the journey that we're on, we need to expect that we're going to make some mistakes, but we'll learn from those mistakes. We'll recover from those mistakes. We'll come back stronger because we made a few mistakes in the journey that we're on. The next couple of points around surfing that I'd like to make is good surfers keep looking outside. You don't look at the next wave that's coming. You look at the wave that's behind that, the wave that's behind that. You look at what the weather's doing. You look at what the currents are doing. You're constantly evaluating the environment that you're in, and you're constantly making the best choice that you can. Another key thing to be a good surfer is that you need to move before the ocean moves you. If you want to catch a good wave, you've got to be in position to catch that wave. You can't just sit in the ocean bobbing around hoping that you'll be in the right place when the right wave comes along. So we all have to think about how we have to move, where we have to move to benefit from the technology that EiB is going to bring into breeding programs, where we have to move to make sure that we create and deliver products that are going to meet and exceed growers' expectations and consumers' expectations. Another thing that surfers learn from a very young age is that you never surf alone. You never go out into the ocean alone, just you. The ocean is tremendously powerful. And so while you may have some skills and you may be able to watch some of what's going on around you, you can't have all the skills. You can't watch everything and understand everything that you need to have. So you don't do it alone. I think this is a key learning for us. It's as we move forward, that we've got to rely on colleagues. We've got to bring in other disciplines that have an understanding that can help us with what consumers need, that can help us with gender preferences, that can help us understand what technology can do, and bring all of those skill sets into helping us identify the right market segment, create the right product profile, put in place the right breeding pipeline to deliver the products that will be needed. So to end the presentation and to challenge you to think about what we need to do as we move forward, good surfers always pool their knowledge. If you turn up at a beach and the surf is good, you'll always see a group of surfers standing on the beach, talking to each other, trying to understand where the currents are, where the waves are breaking, how they should be prepared before they get into the ocean and start to surf and hopefully capture the best wave of the day. They also back each other up. They trade comments. They share ideas. They share thoughts. They share experiences. They watch out for each other. When you're in the water trying to catch the wave, you're looking at your friend, looking at that fellow surfer, making sure that the guy's okay, that the girl is okay. If they do fall from their board, make sure that they come back to the surface and that they're in good condition. And they trade tips and techniques. And so I think these are relevant for all of us that are on this call, all of us that are on this journey towards 1CG. We need to pool our knowledge. We need to back each other up. We need to watch out for each other. We need to make sure that someone's not more stressed than they should be, that someone's not doing something or not understanding something that they need to understand. We need to make sure that we trade tips and techniques and we benefit from the unique skills and experiences that each of us have as we move forward and we create 1CG and we create the process to define targets. We create the process to generate product profiles, the process to generate pipeline investment cases. We do this as we think about putting stage gates in place. We do this as we think about putting advancement meetings in place. And we certainly do it as we think about putting metrics and measuring our progress and being able to report out reliably and consistently the progress that's being made across all centers and across all crops in CG. So I hope that gives you a feel for the focus of Module 1, the thought that's going into the process, the thought that's going into the targets, the thought that's going into the metrics, and how some of these words like pipeline investment case that you've probably heard, what it really means, how it's going to be used, and how we move forward. So with that, I'd like to end and open this up for questions. I hope this was beneficial. I look forward to the questions. I look forward to feedback. I look forward to the opportunity to improve this so we make it as robust as we can so we can all enjoy the success of focused efforts delivering products that are needed. Thank you.
Peter, well, we've received many questions through the chat section. There's a lively discussion about the roles and responsibilities in the development of pipeline investment cases. What's the role of a breeder? How can social scientists be better engaged? Who should be making those tough decisions when you have enter into trade-offs, for example? So I think this is an eternal discussion. But maybe you have some comment on that. You know, how do you see the roles and responsibilities within breeding programs and entering into discourse with multidisciplinary specialists?
Well, from my perspective, to be a successful breeder, you need to understand the needs of the grower and the consumer of the product that you're creating. If you do that and you target your breeding effort to meet or exceed those expectations, you're going to be extremely successful. And so this is about bringing some discipline and alignment to what's being done. It's bringing an awareness of how the product is going to be used and what key traits are needed to make sure that that product will be adopted and will be used extensively. And so I think it's about bringing in as much information as we can and distilling it down to key points, distilling it down to clear targets, and getting alignment that indeed this product profile is what this breeding pipeline is going to deliver, and it will be a successful product in a given market segment. If we can all get aligned on that, and we can set out clear expectations of what deliverables will be, then I think we can all enjoy success. If we don't have clear targets and we don't understand the expectations of growers and consumers, and yet we go about creating product and we implement greatest new technology into creating product, if that product is not accepted and not grown and not consumed, then all those efforts are for naught. And so I think it's just bringing alignment around what needs to be done and making sure that everyone is focused and that we don't get to where we've got a high-performing product, but it's not accepted, not adopted, not grown, doesn't replace existing products simply because it's lacking in one or two key traits that, had we understood what the true market was, we would have ensured those traits were indeed in the product profile, were key targets of the breeding pipeline, and were in any product that was advanced and to commercial status and out there for growers to consider growing and for consumers to consider consuming.
We're going to continue to take questions in the session, but also the networking session is open. So if you wish to, you can match for one-on-one discussions with us event just by navigating on the left-hand side. I'm going to call out some more questions here from the chat, but of course you can submit one by video chat, and actually that's a pretty surefire way of jumping the queue if you really want to be answered. So there's an interesting question here from Peter Coaldrake, who notes that in cassava, they are challenged by multiple uses of varieties for different products. Therefore, you can have more than one market segment for a single variety, and it becomes very difficult to develop product profiles, especially for quality traits. So how can you learn to balance those multiple needs without having too many breeding pipelines, and address this in building your business case?
It's a great question, and it's always been a challenge, especially in crops that are consumed where the consumer has individual tastes and preferences. I think what's key is to understand what are the must-have consumer traits, and how do you ensure that those must-have consumer traits are there, and target your breeding effort to deliver those. And I understand that we can continue to subdivide the market segments, but at some point we've got to say, no, this is general enough that we can create product that will be useful. I think it's also key to understand that an individual grower may be growing product for multiple market segments. And so in the past, it may have been we thought about creating product for a grower, a generic type of product, but indeed that grower may be producing product for his own family to consume, for him to sell into a commodity market, for him to sell into an end-use value chain. And so one customer may be growing three different market segments. And so again, it's the understanding of what's there. It's how do we distill it down to key traits? How do we make sure that we describe the product well when it is going to be commercialized, so that growers and consumers can make the decision, is this the right variety for me, yes or no? So very complex question. I think there's a happy medium between being too general and being so specific that we could never have enough breeding pipelines to create product for every unique set of circumstances. But we have to thread the needle and do the best we can with the resources we have available.
Discussion continues to rage in the chat section, so we'll be recording the chat, and it will probably relate to ongoing outreach in the future. So there may be future events based around the discussions being taken up there. For now, I have a discussion from. Well, I did say if you can share your video, you get to jump a queue. So here is Gary.
There we go. Yeah, just on this, I think that the points come up in the chat a couple of times regarding, the role of social scientists, getting help from social science teams in both characterizing market segments and designing product profiles. And we know that the EIB really has essentially no capacity in that area. Nobody full-time with that skill set, unless I'm mistaken. Peter, do you think that that's a big hole that needs to be filled? I know Module 1 is hiring. Maybe this is the moment to try to change that direction a little bit. It doesn't need to be led by a breeder. It needs to be perhaps led by somebody with market analytical skills who communicates well with breeding teams and with social science teams in the CG, because that's how the disciplines break out.
I mean, absolutely, it's an input that's needed. I think we need to look at it and say, how do we best identify individuals or groups of individuals that can provide that input, and how do we make sure that we get it integrated into market segment consideration and product profile development. And so I think for me, some of that will be, it's out there. It's just a matter of having the critical mass to talk to folks and collect that input. I'm most concerned about the data that's needed to develop robust investment cases, where we're needing to collect data on number of folks in poverty or number of households or those sorts of things, where because we're defining unique boundaries for each market segment, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting to collect and assimilate and proof that data to make sure that it's meaningful and we're comfortable with it as it drives some potentially drives key decisions. And so I think there's work that needs to be done. I think there's folks out there. We need to identify them. We also need to spend the time to understand from each other why some of these traits are important. And once we have that appreciation, then I think it becomes easier to say, absolutely, those traits need to be in a product profile because of this reason, that reason, some other reason. And so I think, finding the folks, having the communication, getting the understanding will help us get a long way from where we are. That's not one or two people in EIB. That's collectively all of us identifying people that we know that could have a useful input and make a significant contribution to making sure we consider this from all aspects, and that the market segments and product profiles are realistic when we look at it from all angles, and that the products that will ultimately be developed will be successful in the marketplace. So,
yeah, and it's really not the breeders who should be doing that.
No, it's not the breeders.
But Peter Coaldrake pointed out that they're being asked to in many cases. So yeah, we really need to clarify that. There have also been observations that social scientists are saying, well, it's not my job, we're being paid, we're not being paid for it. Well, if you've got a Gates grant or a USAID funding or CRP money for breeding, and there's social science support within that funding stream, then yes, they are being paid for it, and they need to help out with it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's the collective outcome of the combined effort, right? And so everyone that's involved, everyone that's at a center should be involved in what that center is creating and delivering. And if there are social scientists there, the gender specialists, they all need to have an input into, okay, what are the targets that we gain that of the products that this center, that this breeding program is going to create and going to deliver to the marketplace. And if the products fail, it's a collective failure of everyone that they didn't provide the right input, right? And so I think it's helping folks understand that their job is providing the input to be sure that the right products are going to be created that at a minimum meet expectations, ideally exceed expectations of growers and consumers. And we all have a role in contributing to that. I think, breeder can facilitate some of that. EIB can facilitate some of that, but no one of us can contribute everything that's needed. It's a collective joint effort, and we all need to recognize that, and we all need to figure out how we make the best contribution we can.
So there's another comment here about the language which we speak, the different languages which are spoken in the social sciences and which are spoken by breeders. And of course, there are the different terminologies used and understood within the breeding community. So there's a question here, which I think maybe you mentioned in your presentation, but more detail. What is Module 1 doing to create a common vocabulary going forwards? And I guess, how can that effort be extended to connecting the social sciences and the breeding communities?
We've proposed a common language. It's in a sort of late draft stage. We're getting these processes out and getting input from folks that are outside just the breeding community. And so I think that's what we can do. If folks have ideas, suggestions, recommendations of how we can accelerate that, if there's folks that are on this call that would like to see some of this work, please reach out to me and let me know, and I'll do my best. And I think we have to acknowledge it's going to continue to evolve, but at some point we've got to say, okay, this is good enough to drive forward and at least get us a baseline for what's happening today, and so that we can look across all the crops and say, okay, is the current effort and the current focus aligned with the potential impact and value that could be created? If so, great, we'll move forward. If there are some outliers, we need to look at those outliers, make the needed adjustments. So I think we'll try to get this out as much as we can, get as much input as we can, realizing that for each of the crops in the CG system, they are going to have their own uniqueness and their own peculiarities, that no one process can be broad enough to capture everything, but the concept and the key steps in the processes that we're trying to develop, I hope will be meaningful and useful, and fine tweaks can be made crop by crop to make sure that the market segments that are identified, the product profiles that are developed, are as robust and are as thoughtful and all-encompassing as they possibly could be, and then they provide the targets for which the effort needs to be focused, and then we can easily measure, are we being successful, yes or no, with what's being done. If we have the right targets in place, and we have the right metrics that we agree to, that will be measured across crops, so that we can understand, are we making the progress towards genetic gain? Have we got the right traits that will get products accepted in the marketplace, that will replace varieties that have been in the marketplace for a number of years? We need to get them replaced with newer, better varieties, both from a yield perspective and also a quality perspective, that the quality of the products will meet consumers' needs. So.
Great, thank you. So once again, if you wish to, you can begin to network in the panel to the left. We are hanging around in the stage area instead of going for coffee, but that's okay. That's what you prefer. We have a change in pace in the question from Stella Salvo here, who asks, what kind of feedback has EIB given to the teams that have submitted product profiles already? Since there is more work to do to define markets, it's clear that the profiles need to be reviewed more than annually, and with review, plans and priorities can change.
That's a great question. What I've tried to do in the time I've been working with EIB is get the baseline, right? And so we started off early with the pipeline investment case because we had some deadlines that needed to be met. We've got one round from all crops and all centers. So now we can start to see, where are different centers as far as understanding market segments? Where are they as far as having product profiles defined? Where are they as far as aligning their breeding pipelines to those market segments? So now that we've got that baseline, now that we're close to having the process down and for the definitions of segments and product profiles, I think we're ready to come back around and work with each of the crop leads and with the broader scientific community at the CG centers to make the improvements that in some cases need to be made. In other cases, it's minor tweaks. I think some centers and some crops have got very well-defined market segments, very well-defined product profiles. We're working with the folks that are thinking about gender and making sure that their efforts and their processes are integrated into what we're doing here. So we've got the baseline. We understand where different groups are at. And I think as we go forward over the next couple of months, we'll be reaching out group by group to say, okay, this is where you are. This is where we'd like you to move to. How can we help? How can we make a more robust market segment definition? How do we to improve product profiles? How do we make these consistent? How do we make them so they're easy to look across and easy to understand? That's all work that needs to be done and will be done. It's just now a matter of time and a matter of getting the needed input to make sure that we have everything essentially done through the same process, done using the same terms. That would be a great accomplishment if we could get that done over the next couple of months.
I just wanted to pipe in here, and I again greatly appreciative of what Peter has done, kind of working in this interview. He's had brought tremendous insight into this role. And as he pointed out, we do have a baseline, so most programs did submit product profiles, but Stella, as you pointed out, we need to review them, maybe not just on an annual basis. Well, once a pattern is established, then maybe an annual review would be appropriate. But yeah, so the challenge really is getting the right data to provide meaningful insight to design these product profiles. And again, we're trying to fill some roles here that can help facilitate that. There is quite a bit of knowledge in some of the centers regarding crops, for the target areas, for the market segments. But as you understand, most of this data has been collected in context of a specific project, and so many of those are out of date. And we really, as has been pointing out in the chat session here on the chat panel, we need to do a better job of bringing in our social scientists, gender specialists, nutritionists, etc., social and the socioeconomists to make sure that we can design appropriate product profiles based on good market segment data. So it's an ongoing process. We wish we could, just access a database and pull up a bunch of information. It doesn't exist in the CG, unfortunately. There is not a unified platform where social scientists, put in data that can be helpful in defining some of these market segments to help us get a better understanding of the potential of variety adoption in certain areas, or what drives variety adoption. So we're trying to fill that void, and we're in the hiring process of bringing somebody hopefully on board that can facilitate coordination and cooperation among the centers to get that information.